From a man who conquered the entire known world by the time he was 30, to a body lying in a Babylonian palace that nobody could explain, to an empire tearing itself apart before the funeral even happened. This is the death of Alexander the Great explained. A mystery so complete that 2,300 years later, the world's best historians still can't agree on what actually killed him. But let's rewind, because to understand how shocking this death was, you need to understand what Alexander was before the night he stopped being invincible. He was 20 years old when he became king of Macedon. 20. His father, Philip II, the man who'd built Macedonia into a military machine, had just been assassinated at his own daughter's wedding by his own bodyguard at a party. And Alexander, who'd been trained his whole life for this moment, walked into the throne room and took over without blinking. He was 20. And by the time he was 25, he'd already crossed into Asia and started dismantling the largest empire the world had ever seen, the Persian Empire, like it owed him money. By 32, Alexander the Great had conquered over 2 million square miles of territory. 2 million! His army marched more than 22,000 miles over 11 years. That's roughly the distance from New York to Sydney and back. On foot, in sandals, through deserts and mountains and frozen passes. And they won almost every single time they showed up. He never lost a battle in 15 years of warfare. Not once. Let that sit with you for a second. He beat Darius III, king of the most powerful empire on earth, 3 separate times. He marched into Egypt and they handed him the crown. He crossed the Hindu Kush into what is now Afghanistan and Pakistan. He fought war elephants in India and came out the other side. He was planning to conquer Arabia next. The man genuinely didn't know how to stop. And here's the thing about Alexander that people always skip past. He wasn't just a general. He was the general, the one who rode at the front of the charge, not behind it, not watching from a hill, at the front, on his legendary black horse Bucephalus, smashing into enemy lines alongside his soldiers. He was wounded at least 7 times in battle. An arrow through his lung in India, a sword to the thigh, an axe blow to the helmet in Persia, a javelin to the shoulder in Uzbekistan. He kept going. Every single time. He kept going. So when this man, 32 years old, undefeated, already drawing up maps for his next campaign, suddenly fell sick at a dinner party in Babylon, nobody knew what to do. 'Cause Alexander the Great wasn't supposed to be able to die like this. Nobody had managed to kill him in 15 years of trying. What chance did a fever have? But here's the crazy part. The night it started wasn't dramatic at all. There was no battle, no ambush, no last stand on a mountain pass. He had dinner with a friend, drank a lot of wine, went to bed, and then 12 days later, he was gone. And nobody, not then, not now, can fully explain what happened in between. But before we get to that night, we need to talk about the 8 months that came before it. 'Cause Alexander in the last year of his life wasn't the same person who'd conquered half the world with a grin on his face. 8 months before Alexander died, his best friend died, Hephaestion. And if you think best friend sounds too casual for a man like Alexander, understand this. Hephaestion was Alexander's everything. His closest companion since boyhood. His second in command on the battlefield. The one human being on earth that Alexander trusted without reservation. Some historians call them lovers. Others call them brothers. The ancient sources just say that Alexander wept openly at his bedside and refused to leave the body for hours. The grief that followed was extreme. Historically documented, jaw-dropping extreme. Alexander had the royal physician, the doctor who failed to save Hephaestion, crucified. He ordered a funeral pyre in Babylon that cost 10,000 talents of silver. 10,000. For context, 1 talent could pay a skilled craftsman for 6 years. He ordered the manes and tails of all horses and mules cut short as a sign of mourning. He ordered the sacred fire at Persian temples extinguished, something Persians only did when their king died. He wanted Hephaestion worshipped as a divine hero. Sir, that is a lot of feelings for a general who supposedly didn't have any. And this is where things get interesting, because the Alexander who came back from that grief wasn't the same. He was drinking more heavily, taking risks that made even his most loyal generals uncomfortable, pushing harder, planning bigger, burning with something that looked less like ambition and more like a man who had lost the only person who made him feel like a human being rather than a symbol. By the spring of 323 BC, Alexander had returned to Babylon. The Arabian campaign was weeks away from launch. His army was rested. His maps were ready. But Babylon, as it turned out, was where everything stopped. And here's the thing. Before he even entered the city, the warnings were already there. Not metaphorical ones. Actual, recorded warnings that ancient sources documented. 3 of them. Number 1. The Babylonian priests called the Chaldeans sent Alexander a message before he entered the city. They told him it was dangerous. The omens were bad. He should approach from the east, not the west, or catastrophe would follow. Alexander heard them out, ignored them, and entered from the west. Number 2. A tame lion kept inside the palace was approached by a random man who just wandered in off the street somehow. The lion walked directly up to Alexander, nuzzled him gently, then dropped dead on the floor. Right there, Alexander had the wandering man executed as a bad omen, noted the weirdness, and kept moving. Number 3. A stranger walked into the throne room while Alexander was away, sat down on Alexander's royal throne, put on his royal robe, and just sat there, refused to speak, refused to explain. Ancient custom said this was a sign of impending catastrophe for the king. Alexander had the man executed. He still didn't leave Babylon. Every single warning. Ignored. Every one. So, the night of May 29th, 323 BC, Alexander attended a drinking party thrown by a Macedonian nobleman named Medius of Larissa. This part the sources agree on. It was a proper session, the kind Alexander had become increasingly known for in his final years. He drank heavily. Then he drank more. Then, according to some accounts, he was handed the cup of Heracles, a massive ceremonial vessel, and he drained it, and immediately cried out in pain, like a bolt of agony had gone through him. Other sources say he felt fine that night, and the symptoms only started the following morning. Yeah, cool. The ancient record-keeping on the most important death in world history isn't exactly airtight. Either way, by June 1st, Alexander had a fever. He was taken back to the palace. His soldiers, the veterans who had followed him on foot across 11 years and 22,000 miles, started lining up outside his chambers to see him. He was so ill, he could barely lift his hand to acknowledge them as they filed past. This man, the one who'd charged into war elephants and survived ambushes in mountain passes and bled on 100 different battlefields. He couldn't lift his hand. But here's the kicker. For 12 days, Alexander lay dying in that palace in Babylon. And during those 12 days, something even more disturbing happened. Something that turns out to be one of the strangest facts in all of ancient history. But we'll get to that in a minute. First, what was actually killing him? By June 7th, he couldn't speak. By June 9th, he'd lost consciousness. On June 10th or 11th, 323 BC, Alexander the Great was dead, 32 years old, never lost a battle, planning his next conquest, gone. Before he lost the ability to speak, his generals crowded around the bed and asked him the question the entire world needed answered. To whom do you leave the empire? Alexander looked at them and said, to the strongest. Cool, 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 cool. So we're just going to do 40 years of war then. Got it. Now before we get into what happened after, I want to stop right here and ask you something. Do you think Alexander was murdered? Or do you think the greatest conqueror in history was genuinely just taken out by a fever? Because the answer changes how we read the next 2,000 years of world history. Drop your verdict in the comments below. We're coming back to this question at the end, and I genuinely want to know where you land. 'Cause here's the thing. There are 4 major theories about what killed Alexander the Great, and every single one has serious historians and researchers behind it. Number 1. Typhoid fever, complicated by grief and alcohol. This is the most widely accepted theory today. A 1998 analysis by a team of infectious disease specialists argued that Alexander almost certainly contracted typhoid from contaminated water in Babylon. His extreme grief over Hephaestion and his escalating drinking had already weakened him significantly, and his body just couldn't fight it off. Typhoid fits the 12-day progressive decline. It fits the symptoms. But here's the problem. It doesn't explain everything. Number 2. Poisoning. Specifically, strychnine dissolved in the waters of the Styx. And yes, the waters of the Styx is a real thing. It's a river in the mountains of Greece, whose water is so chemically corrosive it can dissolve metal containers. Ancient armies knew about it. The main suspect in this theory is Antipater, The powerful regent Alexander had left in charge of Macedon while he was away conquering the world. Here's why Antipater had motive. Alexander was reportedly planning to remove him from power and summon him to Babylon in the weeks before his death. Antipater knew it. The theory goes that Antipater's son Iolaus, who happened to be Alexander's personal cupbearer at the time, delivered the poison at the Medius banquet. Aristotle, who had personal reasons to despise Alexander after Alexander executed his nephew Callisthenes, has also been floated as a co-conspirator who provided the substance. The poison theory fits the motive, fits the sudden onset of that banquet night, and has never been definitively disproven. Spoiler alert, nobody was ever charged. Number 3. Guillain-Barré syndrome. This is the most recent theory, proposed in 2019 by a New Zealand researcher named Catherine Hall. And I have to give it to her, because her argument is genuinely disturbing in a way that makes you look at the whole story differently, and it explains the one fact that no other theory can fully account for. And we haven't gotten to that fact yet. Here's what it is. Alexander's body did not decompose for 6 days after he was declared dead. 6 days. In the Babylonian summer heat. In the ancient world, this was considered miraculous, proof that he was a god, that the earth itself was honoring him. But Dr. Hall's theory says something far more unsettling. She thinks Alexander wasn't actually dead when they declared him dead. She believes he was in a state of ascending paralysis caused by Guillain-Barré syndrome. Fully conscious, fully aware, capable of thought and feeling, but completely unable to move or speak or signal in any way. He may have been lying there listening as his generals argued over his empire, watching as preparations began for his funeral. And then eventually, days later, he actually died. Man, history really said no chill at all. Theory number 4. Alcohol-related cardiomyopathy. Years of extreme, escalating drinking had been quietly destroying Alexander's heart long before Babylon. Combined with the accumulated physical damage from 7 battlefield wounds and the psychological devastation of losing Hephaestion, some historians argue his body had simply been used up. Even the body of the greatest conqueror in history can only absorb so much. To the strongest. 3 words, and those 3 words detonated 40 years of war. His generals, the Diadochi, they were called, meaning the successors, immediately began calculating. Within months, they were fighting each other. Roxana, Alexander's wife, was pregnant with his heir when he died. She gave birth to a son, Alexander IV. Both she and the boy were murdered within a few years by rivals who wanted no blood claims to complicate things. Alexander's mother, Olympias, was executed. His half-brother, Philip III, was killed. Every single person with a legitimate claim to his legacy was hunted down and eliminated by the same men who had once pledged their lives to protect it. The empire Alexander spent 15 years building, 2 million square miles, was carved into pieces, and the pieces went to war with each other for the next 4 decades. The world he made didn't outlast him by a generation. And here's the modern echo. We talk about Alexander's empire like it was a permanent achievement, like he reshaped the world in a way that stuck. But the truth is, it lasted exactly as long as he did. The moment he was gone, it was gone. 'Cause he'd built the whole thing around one person, himself. And he'd never, not once in 32 years of conquering, ever dealt with what happens the day after the conqueror isn't there anymore. He didn't name an heir properly. He didn't build a system that could run without him. He built a legend. And legends don't have succession plans. Every empire that has come apart since, every strongman state that collapsed overnight, is running the same play Alexander ran. Power centralized in one person and nothing after. Oh, and one more thing before we close. Nobody knows where his body is. His generals eventually buried him in a golden sarcophagus in Alexandria, Egypt. His tomb became one of the most celebrated sites in the ancient world. Julius Caesar visited it when he was young, and reportedly wept, because Caesar was 32 years old, and felt he hadn't accomplished nearly enough yet. Augustus visited and accidentally broke off the nose while trying to pay his respects. And then, somewhere around the 4th century AD, the tomb disappeared. No record of what happened to it. No remains ever confirmed. 2,000 years of searching. Professional archaeologists, treasure hunters, governments, nothing. The greatest conqueror in human history is lying somewhere on this earth right now, and we genuinely do not know where. And when the news finally reached Macedon, When the people who had known Alexander as a boy finally understood that he was gone, they didn't cheer. Not even the people who had wanted him gone. They just sat with it. Because for over a decade, Alexander had been the fixed point. The one thing in the ancient world that stayed constant while everything else shifted. And now there was no fixed point. Just silence, and generals, and the slow, heavy understanding that nothing was ever going to feel that certain again. We still name children after him. His battle tactics are still taught in military academies today. The cities he founded, Alexandria in Egypt, Kandahar in Afghanistan, more than a dozen others, are still standing. 2,300 years later, the shadow of one man who died at 32 falls across the world like it never left. So I'm coming back to the question I ask you. Do you think he was murdered? 'Cause if Antipater did it, if the cup at the Medius banquet was poisoned, then one of the most successful political assassinations in all of human history happened right under the noses of the most feared, most battle-hardened army that ever existed. And the killer walked away clean. Hero or victim? Murdered or just beaten by a fever? Drop your verdict in the comments. I read every single one. And if this one got under your skin, wait until you hear what happened when 500,000 enslaved people decided to take on France, Britain, and Spain at the same time. And won. Every single one. Click right here.